Hello and welcome to anyone who dares witness Forrest have a stream of consciousness over one of the factions that he is currently making in his game. And today I want to talk about what's essentially going to be the green faction, the one that is focused around herbs. And I'm going to imagine it would be very easy to figure out that all the factions are going to be based around a certain aspect of the game in it. The white deck is based around flash, blue deck is based around techniques, red, which might be recipe, but right now is contestants, and black is around recipes, which might be, contestants, and purple will be around puffs, and trying to develop the game where there is definitely a wide variety of play styles, so the game can be enjoyable in quite a bit of different ways. But of course, with so many factions, balance is going to be quite the thing, but that's to be expected. You can tell, when it comes to mini games, the based on what cards are made, one faction will come out on the top, because certain cards just play really well and for their theme or whatnot. But right now I want to talk about specifically the herb deck, the herbalists, the green. And there is a major problem when it comes to a faction that's focused around specifically the resource of the game and how to, play around it. And I know one of my original ideas was to do like a multi-herb thing where you can in a sense, create more powerful recipes by having, in a sense, like two herbs take up the bottom slot instead of just one herb, and it be kind of like an exclusive mechanic for, green, or at least, for the first few sets. So if cross faction is a thing, which now that I think about it, now leads to more other problems that I'll get into. I guess I'll get into if I remember. And right now, the current ideas for the faction is that one, it is based around having an absolute abundance of pretty much the resource, and that, having having just an abundance of energy. And of course, there's a problem with that. But if you have an abundance of energy, that means they can dump their hand and pretty much just play everything available. So that leads to like two things to really be concerned about. It seems to come to a logical conclusion that this faction should be completely starved of card draw, so they are not overwhelmingly playing everything in their hand and drawing everything. And that leads to the cross faction idea of, you're going to want to pick up green because you're just going to have the energy, and all the other factions will have a use for it because they want to dump their hands. And so when it comes to potential abundance, we need to stave off the idea that, throwing everything out as fast as possible is a bad idea. And the only way to really facilitate that idea as of right now is having a mechanic specific to green, where you actually kind of just burn the herbs, or I want to say cultivate the herbs, as in, since it makes sense for them to be the kind of like the more hippy dippy environmental focused, farmers type, the people being in this faction, because that makes sense. And they'll want to take instead of constantly using the herbs for the flask, they want to grow more of it. So there will be the ones that in I don't know how it's going to be done in a way where it's like flashy or meant to impress the judge. But it could be potentially the idea, and considering like lore, what's happening in the game is that they are going and taking these herbs and growing them into more trees and plants so you can get more of the herbs, which would actually tie in with abundance. But instead of the idea of getting even more herbs, that they have the ability to pretty much get rid of them, just put them in the discard pile, not use techniques or anything, or flask or anything, and just impressing the judge. So there is a reason to not just immediately just use it on as energy, or pretty much dump your hand and you're left sitting there going, what am I going to do now? And kind of have this potentially used for either A, keeping up with the other team so they don't win, and then B, also being able to put themselves in a situation where they can push for the win. And as kind of thinking about how to do that in terms of how the mechanic's going to work, because it seems kind of awful that it has to be that it's a card you play. I mean, it won't accept leave it out as an option, but there's probably make the card there where you take 3 herbs, put it in discard pile, and you make an impression. Or the aggro deck doesn't need to do that. And it, like, the card would allow for a way of doing it. Or let's say it is a mechanic that's tied to the contestant himself, and you have the potential to once during your turn, you have the option to discard 3 herbs to get 1 impression on the the contestant card itself as its own keyword. And maybe not all the herbalist contestants will have the capability of doing that, because what I'm definitely trying to do is have kind of like two play styles per faction, and playing around with the idea of how to do so. And kind of like with right now, what I have an example in terms of white the Flask faction. One of them is based around doing a show in terms of like kind of shattering them. You put them out there and you keep breaking them, and it looks really this explosive display of like glass shattering everywhere. And then there's like the other idea of, they say sustain, they're making sound, and you can potentially play music with the glass, and kind of like idea where they are making sounds by themselves and they're impressing the judge and being a more consistent version of the faction. And it really seems that one of them's more bursty and the other's more under control, because you want to try to keep them from winning till you get all the flash doing a whole song or whatever, which is the current idea for the white faction. But green is a little more interesting, because it's like, what can you do with herbs? And it's like, and I was thinking, potentially, one faction, one of the play styles is just constant alchemizes, because you're putting so many herbs into the flask. That's your way of winning. It's just boom, 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 alchemize. You're not really worried about getting the recipes for the most part. So with that in mind, I'm definitely going to have to, change a lot of recipes. Like here's one that's draw cards, which as I mentioned earlier, might be a problem. But with the way that one works is that you had to discard 2 or 1 based on what you got, and so and there was also the idea of the herb faction is able to draw an herb from the Durskala pile, and if you get herbs in your hand once per turn, you can put 1 herb in your hand down to really kind of speed up. Also, have another speed up process for kind of dumping the herbs into the flask. And so, though being able to get so many herbs, recipes will be constantly popping off because it alchemizes. So probably green faction recipes will have to be weaker than most, as to not constantly be having to, that is me, I forgot to turn off sound, and having to deal with the constant strength of the recipes, because the recipe cards are harder to do, and so they should be a bit more powerful than probably techniques, and then puffs behind it. And so there's a way. There's got to be a way to kind of restrict the power of being able to just use all your cards in such a crazy fashion. And it seems like the best route for the cards in general for the green faction to just be overall weaker. And definitely cross faction will be a very scary potential in the game when it comes to herbs coming in abundance, which will definitely need some play testing as soon as I readjust the cards to the philosophy of how this is going to work around and what's going to be in the mechanics. Because there could also be the potential ideas of better herbs or like enchanted herbs. But how does that play? And this could really work in recipes in a sense too. But it seems like something that's very easy to make mistakes in terms of, you're playing with the cards and then you lose track of whatnot. And so it's a way of having to think around what could be the potential problems are for, any of these things. And so the dilemma comes of how do we make sure it is... I got 2 phones. And how do I solve the problem of having way too much energy and discouraging other factions from wanting to use those cards in a sense? Because there was also the idea of, since you're getting an abundance, you're getting so much. I would think the lack of control of what's becoming available and what you can do with the herbs themselves should be a lot more chaotic. And trying to get a perfect recipe should be quite a bit more difficult. Simply because it's like it's not like, during the herb picking phase, you draw 2 herbs and you get to put 1 wherever you want. It's like you play a card and all of a sudden herbs just flop down into your flask and you can't really determine which one it is. And I would see there's the potential of having your, you take the top 3-4 cards of your herb pile, have your opponent choose 2 of them, shuffle the 2 back in there, and then they get to choose where it goes. And so you struggle a lot more to get perfect recipes, and so if another faction decides to get those cards, they have to take the risk that they are getting more herbs, but they might just ruin their chance to get the the stronger effect of the recipe that they're trying to get, because some of them have drawbacks, and they just make a weaker drawback. So there's definitely a lot to think about, and kind of glad to have this little stream of consciousness, because now as I think about it, I definitely have to completely readjust all the cards in terms of what they do, because a lot of them is like, say, man, you can kind of manipulate, like the idea of getting the top herb of your discard pile allows you to you can wait until you got the perfect card, or you place when you like use a technique, and then you have your herbs, and you make sure the green one's on top, so when you use this, that one's available. And it's like, it seems kind of absurd to potentially like shuffle your discard pile. Like, it just seems not fun. But it does, the idea of playing around with the herb discard pile, like you have to take the bottom herb, and then put it in on your flask so you don't see it. Of course, there's easy ways to cheat, or remember, if you remember, what you're doing. And I mean, no one's going to stop you from checking your discard pile, so what's down there. But at least then you have a little bit less control, in a sense that when you put herbs in the discard pile, you know what's on the top, and you put it in the select order because you're being mindful about it and putting them there. Well, at least in the bottom, you're kind of forced to deal with the order that you have been putting them in there. And so it gives it a little bit more of a chaotic effect. There's definitely like a lot of things going on here. Let's look at another card. When an herb is put into this flask, you may grab another from your herb discard pile to make it a multi-herb instead. Now I get with that, the multi-herb concept is in some of these cards, while I was brainstorming just whatever the original idea, and now I have to kind of change this one completely just because nothing interacts with the idea of multi-herb, so this card's kind of redundant, which I probably have to pay in mind in my playtest cards, that this thing exists. Let's go with Picky Pickle. When you alchemize with this flask, you may discard all non-green herbs for an extra impression, which really helps with that abundance idea, because now instead of putting it in your energy pile, and these are the cards that really work really well with the idea of kind of works well with the idea of the impressions for discarding herbs, because this really goes well with the theme. So this is actually a really good card to go along with the theme. Let's see here. When an herb, this is Brown Beetle again. Oops. Homeless Horse. When you alchemize, discard this puff. Draw a card when you put an herb in this flask. Draw the card when you put an herb in this flask. So this is essentially draw 3. Which, there you go. Because this will be very easy to draw 3 cards. And now, after thinking about the idea that this is a bad puff for this faction to have, because that's card draw. But at least with a puff, it's difficult to it's not really difficult, but it requires quite a bit of sacrifice. So this might actually be tolerable. I definitely originally thought this was herbs and flasks were going to be the opposite factions, but that might not be the case. But tech is always good to have, though this one might have to change. Then there's like the idea of both players draw 2 herbs. You chose which flask they all go. Opponent's herbs must go in opponent's flask. So too. This is a little strong, and it's meant to, be more of a hassle to your opponent. I mean, you give them the benefit, but you could potentially ruin their potential with the recipe. And if you force an alchemize, then they have a decision to make here. So this can force the opponent to alchemize and not play the recipe they want, or prevent the recipe at all. Here's one that thinking about it, it's a little broken. Discard an herb, grab all herbs of the chosen herb and does discard pile, put into the herb deck. There's a good reason why that costs that much. This might be a bit much, but you want the game to end, and this is not really good till way later on when it comes to the green herbs. So this is definitely late game card that might actually work, but I have to play test some more, and I actually going to have to put a bit of effort to come up with all sorts of new cards. Recipe: discard an herb in this flask and grab a technique card from your discard pile to your hand. Don't discard the herb. More like a tech card. I don't see anything wrong with this for the most part. Bullet seed, discard 2 herbs used for this recipe and destroy target flask. Tech card. Again, with the concept of, flat being anti-flask. Because I know when I made these cards, that's probably what was originally going to be. Overgrowth, this one's crazy. From the discard pile in the top, and then the top of your pile if you run out of discard. From the discard pile, fill the other flask completely, so you essentially get three alchemizes for the price of one. And I would imagine from left, I would have to word it, but left to right, you place all the herbs till it's all full. So you get 3 alchemizes, and if you can get lucky, you can potentially get another recipe off. There's the card draw one, Tree of Life. Next turn, draw an herb to your hand and put an herb from discard pile into a flask. So this allows you to get 3 herbs immediately on the next turn, and then 2 turns. Again, with the abundance idea. And, I imagine that little, trees growing out of the bottle. What does cornucopia do? Each herb you place in this flask, also place the top herb and discard pile into it. Again, abundance. And with this, you can alchemize a lot faster in here. This might require, specific instances when, or the herb picking phase herb goes in here instead of, just anything, from like your hand, to potentially prevent it from getting too ridiculous. But then again, we don't know what ridiculous is at this point, because the game is, how the game works seems potentially unknown. And so there's that going on. So a lot to think about here, and I guess once I probably need to get one more iteration, because I got the feel for the game in a sense. I'm still going to do some more play testing, but now that I'm getting a feel of it and kind of really thinking about what each faction is and what they do, go and revise all the cards once more and figure out how the factions are going to play. It's like I don't even have two avatars for the this faction right now, and then kind of work from there. It's going to be a lot of work, but that's kind of almost the fun of it. Anyways, there's me kind of having my stream of consciousness about the herb faction. I do want to talk about all the factions and everything and get a better idea of what I'm going for, and probably maybe by next video, which I doubt, but I will have changed a lot of these cards to reflect what I want them to be when it comes to how they play. anyways, if you find this all interesting, and, see potential in it, and you want to follow along and see its progress, like, subscribe, the whole shoot match. I'm glad that you even got this far, and I hope to see you again. Adios.